In today's video, I'm going to look at two different geared tripod heads, and I'm going to compare the two and look at the pros and cons of both types. Now, the one I've got here is the Manfrotto Xpro. I've got a Manfrotto tripod, so naturally I went to try out the Xpro Manfrotto geared head. And there are a lot of things I really like about it, but there's one thing I don't like about it. Let's start first with the things that I do like about it. What I do like about it are these big quick release levers. They're nice and big. It's really ergonomically designed. So I can just simply pull this in like this and swivel around very quickly to the position that I want. And that's really handy. You just literally pull down the knob here and you've got quick, fast, larger movements to swing the tripod around to roughly to the position that you want it to be in. And then, of course, once you're in your rough position, then you just simply turn these knobs to move. And it moves around quite fast too. You know, these knobs are nice and big, so you can really get some pretty quick movements. So, yeah, we can move quickly like this, back and forth. Now I can maneuver roughly into the position I want, and then I've got fairly fast. Now I'm turning with the knobs themselves, and the movement is pretty wide and pretty quick, so I can find this composition nice and fast. There we go, the leading line there with the path leading in nicely. I can fine tune, and I really like too is how you can make big movements if you turn the knobs fast, or I can turn nice and slowly and make some really fine movements. Look, tiny adjustments. Now that's a real advantage, of course, to the geared heads. They give you that ability to make some fine adjustments that you wouldn't make ordinarily with any other tripod head. And now I can fine tune that composition and crack off my shot very quickly. I can easily, if I want to, also swing very quickly around here and zoom in on those mountains. Now, that's one advantage to the geared head. When you've got a really tricky composition like this, see, I've got trees to the left, trees to the left and right, and trees and cables at the bottom. So I really need to fine tune the composition to get all those cables and all those trees out. Now, this is not exactly an ideal composition, but it just gives you a good example of how these geared heads give you precise movements. These precise movements can really help you fine-tune that composition, and that is just something you would never get with a ball head or any other type of head. So this is one massive advantage to the geared heads. Now, I took a picture of this earlier. I'll show you some great cloud and light over there. The cloud and light is gone now, but still. Now, that's the great thing about this. And this Manfrotto one, as I say, I love. It's really ergonomically designed that you can just pull these levers down very quickly and make these fast, rapid movements when you need to, and like this. But now comes the con. Now, with geared heads, obviously, you know, it's all down to the mechanics, and there's always going to be maybe some slight movement. It's never going to be as tight as a standard tripod head, the ones that you can tighten. The standard tripod heads that you can tighten up, they're nice and tight and rigid, and fixed into position and they won't move. But the geared heads are most likely, because they're on gears, never going to be as tight. But the thing with the Manfrotto Xpro I found was there's quite a bit of movement in it. See? And that's something that bothered me. See? That's quite a bit of movement. And what I found, actually, if we take this as an example, so what I found was, let's say for example, I fine-tune my composition like so. I've got everything perfectly set, but then when I try to put a filter on, you can see that it's moved slightly. And in some cases it moved quite a bit. If the filter was very tight and really had to force that filter in, I found that it actually moved quite a bit. See, there's quite a bit of movement there, and I'm not making any adjustments here, I'm simply moving my camera. So this is a big downside to this Xpro Manfrotto geared head. So we'll see how the next one compares. The next one I'm going to look at is the Benro. So now let's look at the Benro GD3WH geared head. Now this one was recommended to me by my good friend Melvin Nicholson, and if you're not familiar with him, then I'll put a link up to his YouTube channel here. Go check him out. The guy knows pretty much everything when it comes to photography equipment because he buys it all. But he recommended me this and told me that this was much better than the Manfrotto tripod heads, although he hadn't tried the Xpro one. He had tried a cheaper version of the one that I just showed you. But still, I got hold of this to try this out and compare it to the Manfrotto Xpro geared head, which I've just shown you. So the first thing I would say is extremely lightweight. But just like the Manfrotto Xpro, that was also extremely lightweight. I'll put the weight of the two up here right now so you can compare them side by side. But the difference is not noticeable really. You know, maybe this is 100 grams heavier, but you wouldn't notice. It's no discernible difference really. It's still super, super lightweight. Now, I've got a Manfrotto tripod, so this is a Benro head, but it fits on perfectly. So it's the same thread type, and it fits on to the Manfrotto tripod perfectly. So no problems there whatsoever. Just like before, let's look at the pros first and then the cons. Now the biggest difference between the Manfrotto Xpro and Manfrotto tripod heads and this Benro geared head is the plate. This one, as the Manfrotto, uses its own custom plate, whereas the Benro uses this Arca Swiss type plate. So it's slightly different. In a minute I'll show you how the Manfrotto ones fit on. But the Arca Swiss, many of you are probably familiar, most tripod heads I think have this type of system. So it's quite good. It just slides on like this. Now it has a safety catch too. So the first thing I thought was, if you happen to have the tripod set up like this and you're trying to do an upright shot, what if you accidentally knock this button, turn it? Well, there's a safety catch on there, so that's good. And you can turn it like this and it won't come out. In order for it to come out, I'll hold this like this, you need to pull and turn again. Pull and turn again, then it will come out completely. But even if you pull and turn again, it's quite hard for it to fall out. So then you turn it, lock it, turn it, and you can't get it out unless you pull and turn again. So again, this has got a safety catch on too, so that's useful. So you see here, this is the Manfrotto plate, and this is a Manfrotto tripod head. Now all Manfrotto tripod heads are the same. Now you can see on the back here, it's got an arrow pointing towards the lens. And that means that you can only actually put it in one way. So you can slot it in that way. You can't slot it in that way, it won't work. So it only goes in one way. And then you simply pull the lever out, pull that, and tighten it, and it's fixed. So if you put your camera into the upright position like that, it's nicely fixed in there. It's fixed into a recess, so it's not going to slide out at all, unless you pull this. But the thing is, it does have a bit of a safety mechanism too, because you can't, see, if you pull that, like that, again, it won't come all the way out, unless you push this down. Then it will come all the way out. So that also has a good safety lock on it. Same thing, see? So let's do that again. If we pull that accidentally, it will only pull so far. And the plate stays firmly locked in there, so your camera's nice and safe, it won't fall off. You then would have to pull that out and pull that down for it to fall out. So just like the Manfrotto, this one simply screws on like this, and you can have it like this or like this. Quite simply just line it up in the middle like that. Now you can use the Allen key provided or a big screwdriver, or just simply pull up this and turn it so it's nice and tight, however you want to do it. And it's fixed on, and you just simply put it on, tighten it, and that's nice and tight. Now, one advantage to the Arca Swiss plate over the Manfrotto custom plate is this: the ability to shoot this way if you have a scene this way, but if you happen to have a scene behind you too, rather than try to rotate the whole camera around, you can very easily just do this. And then quickly reset your composition. Like so. So if you've got a scene that you can shoot either way, you can flip your camera around very quickly rather than have to rotate it. So that's a big plus for the Arca Swiss plate, I think. I really like this. I really like this. Until now, I've always only used Manfrotto tripod heads. So that is definitely a big plus in my book. Now, down to the geared head itself. So first of all, just like the Manfrotto, the knobs work nice and smoothly, and you can even just turning the knobs actually, you can very quickly move your position up, down, side by side, up, down, down and up, side by side, like this, or rotate, and everything moves nice and fast. When you need to make fairly big movements, you can do so quite easily. That's a big plus. But again, just like all geared heads and like the Manfrotto Xpro, you can also make these minute adjustments, very fine adjustments, so you can really refine your composition. That is a huge plus when it comes to using a geared head for sure. So as you saw with the Manfrotto Xpro, when everything was fixed into place, there was still some movement, especially up and down. When I put the filters on, it would actually move my composition. Now, it wasn't that it was loose, because when everything was fixed into place, and I even did several long exposures, and they were perfectly sharp. There was no camera shake, no movement during the exposure at all. It's not that it was loose, but you could actually move it. Now, there was some flex, if you will. It was kind of a elasticated movement, and you could, if you moved the camera itself, the whole thing would move. And it's not a problem if you're taking pictures, of course, but the problem I had, as you saw, was when I went to put the ND filter on, it actually moved my composition. Now if you put in most filters on, you could always readjust your composition, no problem. But when I put the 10 stop on, and it was already quite low light, as soon as I put the 10 stop on, I couldn't see anything through the viewfinder or on my live view. So it wasn't until after the exposure that I realized that my composition had been messed up, and I had no way of readjusting my composition because I couldn't see with the filter on. So for me, that was a big problem with the Xpro Manfrotto. But I'm happy to report that with the Benro, this is not an issue. There is hardly any movement at all. When everything is in place, it's really nice and tight. It's rigid. You can move it a tiny bit, but not much. If you move it like this, it will just spring back to its original position. So let's try it with the filter and see if it makes a difference as well. So I've set up a composition. I'll take one shot like that, and now I'll put this is the Kase 10 stop filter, and it's quite thick and it's quite tight, so when you push it in, it fits nice and tight. Now the reason it does that because it fits against the gasket to make sure there's no light leakage. So it's quite tight, so it pushes down quite far, especially when you've got a long lens on it. Now I do an exposure with this on, and we'll see if it's moved much. Now let's compare the two. Not much movement at all, hardly anything. So definitely an improvement over the Xpro in that respect. Nice and rigid, nice and tight, no flex at all in it. Now for the cons. Now, as I said, the knobs work nice and smoothly, just like the Xpro. Everything turns. You've got fairly good big movements you can make with the knobs themselves, or nice and smooth, tiny adjustments. Now, to make the big movements, you have to turn this like this, and here like this. Now again, it works really well, but these are actually quite hard on your fingers. So I can see myself, if you're doing this a lot, you can see yourself getting sore fingers. And especially in the winter, probably when it's cold too. It's quite hard on the fingers. Whereas the Manfrotto, it was really nice. You just grabbed that little plate there and the knob, you squeezed it together and you turned it nice and smooth. Now that was much better. Ergonomically, the Manfrotto was much better. And definitely I would say that grabbing this and turning this, yeah, it's quite hard on your fingers and your thumb. So if you're doing this a lot, it's going to hurt after a while. Now the good thing though, like I said, is the movements are quite good. So you can, in most cases you're not going to make super swinging movements. You're not going to make lots of them, that's for sure. You may do it, oh, I need to swing round that way, for example. Or I need to swing around that way. You're not going to do it that often. So if you're going to make fairly big adjustments like that, you can still use the knob and avoid using these. So I would definitely do that and avoid using these as much as possible. That's for sure. So which one is best? Well, they're both great, quite frankly. And they both do the job. When it comes down to the actual gear head itself, it works smoothly. The knobs work smoothly on both the Benro and the Manfrotto Xpro. Everything that a geared head, both do everything that a geared head is supposed to do. So in that respect, they are both great. Now the only downside to the Xpro is the flex, and of course with the Benro, you don't have the flex. But the great thing about the Xpro was the ergonomics. Ergonomically, it was great. You could grab that, spin it around. The knobs were nice and small, they're nice and smooth. Ergonomically, it was fantastic. Whereas this, again, ergonomically, when the knobs and everything works perfectly, but this turning this bit here to make the large movements is quite hard on your fingers. So that is definitely a minus for the Benro. So when choosing between these two, you have to decide what's important. Now for me, what's important is the rigidity. For most people, as I say, it's only actually a problem when using this 10-stop ND filter, because once I've got it on, I can't see if my composition's been moved. So that's a problem if you have the Manfrotto Xpro. If you're not using a 10-stop filter, or you're using a screw-in filter or a magnetic clip-on filter or something like that that's not going to move, then it's not really a problem. And if that was the case, I'd probably have stuck with the Xpro. But because I have this, and because for me that would be a big problem, I'm going to stick with the Benro. So I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please give this video a like. Now hop down into the description if you're interested in either in the Benro or the Manfrotto Xpro geared head. Then pop down in the description. There's links in the description to several places where you can buy these tripod heads. And I hope you found this comparison useful. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and check out some of my other videos. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye bye.